Hi, my name is Dante Montgomery. For my final presentation, I'll be talking about snowboarding and the materials that go into making it. So first, I'll just give a brief history of how snowboarding kind of came about. Then I'll talk more about modern day snowboards, some of the materials that go into it, and then along the way, I'll talk about some of the innovations that have happened and are continuing to happen to improve snowboards in their performance. So the original snowboards are actually called snurfer. So if you think about a surfboard on snow, that's essentially what it was. So it had no boots, no bindings. It was very simple structure. They were pretty much just made of laminated wood with not really much else going into it. But some later models would use like plastic or fiberglass to as the primary structure of the snurfer. But then they would just use a lanyard at the front to kind of control some of the steering. Now this continued to grow in popularity from the 1960s, obviously up until modern day. And so snowboards have actually changed quite a bit since then. So what actually makes up a good snowboard? It's really these different characteristics listed on the left side. So you want it to be very strong. You want to have low friction on the bottom so that you can go at high speeds. You want to have some predictability and reliability while you're turning, obviously for good safety characteristics. You want to have low vibration and high shock absorption so that you're not feeling that vibration coming through as you're moving at higher speeds. And also with higher speeds, you want really good stability. So now these last three are some terms that are often used. So you want a snowboard that can float in deep powder so that you don't sink to the bottom and get stuck. But you want to have good pop for jumping if you're going to be in a terrain park. And then finally, on some icier runs, you want the edges to be able to cut into the ice so you have more control. So here's a modern day snowboard and the typical layout of it. And so I'll just kind of go through the different layers and what's important about them. So the top sheet's actually the least important of all these different layers. That's really just the top layer where the graphics are, and it really just kind of protects the inside of the snowboard. So it doesn't really add much functional performance, but just protects what's underneath it. So under the top sheet is a layer of fiberglass, and it's primarily just to add some stiffness and rigidity to the board so that it doesn't deform. And then the core is probably the most complex of the primary structure of the board. They're primarily made out of laminated hardwood such as beech, birch, aspen, or bamboo. And there can be some kind of mixture of all of these different types of woods. But there are, it's also possible to make it out of some more exotic materials such as carbon, Kevlar, and there are some very high-end boards that are made of an aluminum honeycomb. Now with these three other options, they are light, they're very lively and very strong, but they are quite expensive for the snowboard. So with these materials, you're looking at snowboards that are going to cost well over $1,000, where typically you like to keep it in the few hundreds, like the mid hundreds. So under the core is just another layer of fiberglass for the same stiffness and maintaining the shape that you want. And then on the sides are edges that are made out of steel. And these are ones to also can protect the insides from the sides, but at the same time, these edges are what allows you to make turns and dig into the snow. And then finally, the very bottom of the snowboard is the base. And this is made out of a polyethylene plastic, and it's often referred to as PTEX. And I'll talk more about the edges and then the base here in just a second. So the sidewall. So I want to talk about the sidewall construction and then materials. And there's primarily three types of sidewalls that you can see. So here's a kind of a side view of a snowboard. And one way that it can be structured. So the top layer is the top sheet here in the dark blue, and then this light blue is the fiberglass. The brown is the core. This next light blue again is the fiberglass, and then the base. Then on here over on the left is a ABS sidewall. So it's ABS plastic, and it's primarily there to absorb shock as well. And then this gray is the steel edge. So the ABS sidewall in this construction is actually quite good at transmitting pressure to the edges as you're trying to turn, so that you get very good edge control here on the steel edges. Now, another type of construction is this cap construction, where there is no more ABS plastic. The top sheet and the fiberglass just come down over the top of it. So this actually helps to make the snowboard more lightweight and more lighter feeling as you're going through. But this is actually not very common anymore in most snowboards. Then finally, the half cap construction is kind of a hybrid of these two different types of constructions, where the fiberglass comes all the way down around the core, but the top sheet only comes part of the way down and comes in contact with the sidewall ABS plastic again. So it kind of has the best of both worlds, where you still get good edge pressure transmission down here, but it's still it's fairly lightweight, and you'll see this more common on higher end snowboards. So some of the newer things that have actually come out here in the past handful of years. So this is a snowboard that is made by Ride Snowboards, and instead of ABS plastic, they use a urethane, what they call a slime wall, but it's made of urethane, and this it has benefits over ABS in that it tends to be better at absorbing shock, and it maintains its structural characteristics when the weather gets very cold. And then here's another innovation that's happened here actually within the past couple of years, where the sidewall's actually been 3D printed. And so this has some of the benefits of being more cost effective. Actually has, they found it to have higher quality and impact resistance at low temperatures for most other ABS plastic. And it is also more ecologic, more sustainable. So it uses less plastic, particularly less waste while it's making these sidewalls. So now I want to talk more about the base, and there's two different types of bases. One's extruded, and the other is centered. So first, talking about the extruded base, like I mentioned, it's a polyethylene plastic. So they have these pellets that are heated at very high temperatures, and then they're put onto the surface of the snowboard, and is allowed to cool down and solidify. So when this process leaves no gaps in the surface. So some of the good things about it is that it's very cheap to make, it's very easy to repair, but this tends to be a lot slower because it doesn't really hold wax that you would put on the board to help reduce friction. And it's also not very abrasion resistant. So it's very good for like entry-level snowboarders that aren't trying to go too fast or more likely to maybe ding up the board on some runs. Now, a centered base uses the same polyethylene pellets, but instead of melting them, it's compressed under high pressure. And so this actually leaves voids within the structure itself. And this is good for getting wax onto the board. And so this material holds wax a lot better, allowing it to go faster. They also find that this structure tends to be more durable. However, it tends to be much more expensive to buy and repair, and you do have to wax the boards more frequently to make sure that it has a sufficient amount of wax in it. And so now I just want to talk briefly about some of the different profiles. So historically, the traditional camber is what is most common on snowboards, and it's good for having a very long edge. So there's a gap between the middle of the snowboard, and contact points are here at the nose and the tail. So it's very good for turning, but it tends to be less forgiving for beginners. It's much easier to do what you call catching an edge and sending a snowboarder falling onto the ground. So the opposite is what's called a rocker or reverse camber, where the middle of the board is touching the ground, but the edges are lifted up. So this is actually very good for powder days, or like when you're trying to go through deeper snow. This leading edge will allow the snowboard to stay above the snow as you're moving through it, whereas the traditional camber does not do that as well. But the rocker doesn't turn as well on some of the harder, by like some of the, I guess, icier hard pack runs. And then the flat camber is kind of in between the two. So it does pretty much all the benefits decently well, but not as good as any of them. So it's kind of a good middle ground for kind of trying to do a bit of everything. And so now there's some actual, some modern snowboard profiles where they actually take some hybrids with these different profiles. So the hybrid camber, hybrid rocker, again, do a lot of the things very well. They tend to be very versatile, but don't do anything particularly great as compared to the camber or rocker profiles. And then they actually have some snowboards that this is much more modern now, this powder snowboard where this is the front end of the board where it actually is the best profile for going through deeper snow. Now, finally, I want to talk about just two quick innovations that have happened recently. So this first one is this magnet traction where they actually have a serrated edge along it. And it allows it to, think about like a steak knife, it allows the snowboard to cut into the ground a lot more effectively, and allows the snowboarder to have much more control. So they've found ways to kind of make these snowboards, use some engineering to take advantage of this kind of new profile that they've created along the edges. And then also, a lot of snowboards have started using some reinforcements. So these are some carbon reinforcements that they put into the core of the board to allow the board to have some flexibility and play, but then when you want to have that extra little boost when you're either jumping or making sharp turns, these carbon inserts allow you to kind of get some extra force into the ground. It also helps with some of the torsion that you may see in the board, and can help with some high-speed stability. So that's my presentation. I very much enjoyed looking more into these technologies, and I'm excited to see where snowboards will continue to grow, especially with 3D printing becoming more and more mainstream. Different ways that they're playing with the cores and the edges and things like that. So thank you, and I appreciate you for listening.